Yet another wrinkle in the Russia story. Newsweek breaking this quote. FBI Director James Comey attempted to go public as early as the summer of 2016 with information on Russia's campaign to influence the U.S. presidential election, but Obama administration officials blocked him from doing so. Now, I should say there has been some debate about whether or not that in fact is true, but nonetheless, that story making the rounds. Let's bring in our panel right now to help sort this out, let all the developments on Capitol Hill. Richard Brodsky is a former Democratic New York State Assemblyman, now a senior fellow at Demos and a professor at NYU. Yes, the children have worn you out. Bill O'Reilly, a former Republican strategist, now a member of the Conservative Party. Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. We got a lot to get to today, guys, from both obviously where we'll start in Washington to even closer to home in New York. But it's surreal, Bill. I mean, it's surreal. I tried to convey just how if you parachuted here, and first of all, the subject that we know they hacked our election, or at least they tried to influence the election, did the Russians. We knew that this was conscious. Now, we don't know to this point in the investigation how much coordination or collusion that there was, but nonetheless, we're even having an investigation in the House and the Senate and the FBI about it.
Right.
And now, every day it seems, Nunes is more and more co-opted, and there's more and more tangential connections to at least players during the campaign in Russia. You can't make this up. And it seems the White House is doing everything they possibly can to pour more gas onto the fire.
And the deeper it goes, the more surreal, to use your word, which is an appropriate one, it becomes. The assumption that I had, and I think others had, was that the Russians were maybe behind leaks of Hillary Clinton information, et cetera, et cetera. It looks, to me and to others, much like it was much more than that, where the Russians were actively participating in the political campaign, almost as political strategists. They were doing bots and algorithms and things to move around news. They were acting as a
and just explain to the layperson here, Bill, that there's discussion that possibly district to district,
yes,
in the battleground states of the Pennsylvanias and the Wisconsins et al., that they were targeting where the information or false information was going.
That's right, down to the individual. They were sending fake news stories. I hate the expression too, Andrew, but they were sending misinformation. It was classic misinformation, and they were doing it almost as political strategists in an American election. It's amazing.
You know, Richard,
if it's true.
But here's what I want to get to. Let's let this play out. Let's see where the facts go. I know where you're going to say, okay? But from your time in the legislature and when you were attempting to conduct an inquiry, one would hope, and I'm not naive, there's always political motivations of both parties whatsoever, but there are certain things you would think, or even out of self-preservation, you're not going to be on the wrong side of the angels here in the search for truth. I haven't seen such intentional obstruction and rooting for one side. It's bizarre.
It's idiocy. Look, I did a lot of very. It's idiocy. I did a lot of very sensitive investigations. We subpoenaed the governor's office. We subpoenaed government officials. We had to go to court to enforce the subpoenas. They were rock'em sock'em battles. The first thing you know is you don't get out ahead of your evidence. And you also, if you have the evidence, you don't have to issue banner headlines. The evidence will speak for itself. This guy Nunes is self-destructive on a level that I don't really understand why he's doing what he's doing. The Senate investigation with this guy Burr, who's no saint, and Mark Warner of Virginia, that's how you do it. And when you do it that way, you don't end up looking like an idiot when A, your first information turns out to be wrong, or B, you were over-promising, or C, you look like you're trying to cover somebody else's tracks.
But it's more than just looking, and more than just the optics of it, Richard. The fact that he, forget about never consulted with his committee members, let alone fellow Republicans, but let alone the vice chair of the committee. He went to the White House, a fact he neglected to mention, then it's borne out, they still want to, they've got rid of the logbooks all of a sudden, and I don't even know what's worse. If he was used as a stooge and he thought he was going to the White House to fill them in on stuff that they sent to him indirectly, or two, that this was all coordinated with the White House. And again, this is how far this rabbit hole goes. 2 weeks ago on Fox News, Trump said, well, wiretapping means many things. This was obviously when he claimed that Obama had bugged Trump Tower. He goes, but stick around in 2 weeks. Wait till you see what comes out.
He was right.
You can connect the dots.
Look, you can parse motive. You can kind of consider what it might be.
You don't have to try hard.
But you don't. But here you have a guy who is violating the easiest, most fundamental rules of how you conduct these things, not to get to the truth, so you don't look like an idiot.
But you think that Nunes's missteps are that he's just an idiot?
Yes.
Or that he's okay?
Oh,
but
I
I think
ascribe more
there's so
to
much
that.
evidence
Yeah.
and so much indication at this point that this is actually intentional, and that his mission is not to run
That's idiot.
that it is not to run an objective oversight of the president in this case, but rather to hide
I'm with
and
Andrew.
help
I think
for
it
the
goes
president.
beyond incompetence.
That qualifies as idiotic.
Well, but you're saying that he's just sort of stumbling into it by blind luck. I'm saying this is the game plan.
You cannot make these kinds of mistakes and have a brain in your head. Not because you don't want to protect the president. Maybe he wants to do that. It's because in the end, the truth is going to come out.
You know,
in the
Andrew-
end, you can't keep this stuff secret.
You know, Andrew, for me, the one thing I learned about being so wrong, like so many, about what happened in November and misreading, as we all did, where the polls were and everything else, was the public's appetite for detail. They want a headline. Sometimes they'll even take one that's not true, and they'll move on. In a bizarre way, completely unintentionally, the actions of the Devin Nuneses of the world and this White House have suddenly made this a more interesting story for people beyond the four of us and people like us. Now all of a sudden they're like, wait a minute, they got to be hiding something, A, and B, wait a minute, logbooks disappearing. This sounds like a good episode of Scandal. All of a sudden, this guy who's leaking it, every day you're seeing breaking news banners dozens of times a day by the 24 hours. Now all of a sudden, it's interesting to people that might not have cared
They
before,
haven't made-
and that's bad for the White House.
They haven't made the final connection.
Of course they have.
The
But my
final
point is,
connection.
people care where they might not have. And this thing had a chance to fade away a little bit. I think they've done their best to make it compelling.
I think there's some truth to that for the small sliver of Americans who were in the middle between Trump and Clinton going back to last November. But one of the unfortunate side effects, at least from my standpoint in all of this, is that Nunes and other people's actions have generated enough headlines to support both sides. You can, if you look for Nunes's as a reason or as a justification that it somehow clears the White House or it makes the Trump team look better, you can derive that, and there are headlines to support it.
Except what I would say, Bill, is this doesn't happen in a vacuum. And by that I mean, Andrew's right. Polls bear them out. There's base on one side that I don't know what it's going to take for them to change their mind, and then obviously you have the other side. However, today in an unrelated story, Trump, in another tweet, basically threw down the gauntlet with the Freedom Caucus and threatened their livelihoods that he may go after them in 2018.
Right.
Paul Ryan's trying to do damage control here to try and say, oh, no. He's not going to play with Democrats for health care. He'll actually work with us. Let's not make him angry, so he'll do another tweet, in effect.
Right.
I'm really not overgeneralizing. To my point, he's not doing himself any favors with making sure that his core base will stay with him when he's picking fights on unrelated things and making enemies I don't know he has to make.
It's absolutely right, and I'm going to be very kind right now and say it's exactly what Richard's been saying for a long time. That eventually,
do that.
I know, isn't it a terrible thing to do?
Please.
But that eventually he would
You're
get
a
in trouble with the
gentleman of the
conservatives and the libertarians, and that he would
Trump-
need to cut deals with the Democrats.
Trump was
and that's, but I
never-
don't. But are the Democrats going to take him at this point?
Trump
But
was
even
never-
if they don't, if you're now
if
the
they don't,
Freedom
he's in
Caucus
real trouble.
guys, right? You're not going to give him cover for everything.
Absolutely not.
They weren't going to give him cover for everything anyway.
They've excused, to Andrew's point, the Devin Nuneses of the world have tried to change the subject to be about unmasking rather
Freedom
than the
Caucus
basic
are
idea
about
we work with the
infrastructure,
Russians.
about education, about health care, about privatizing Social Security. When the mistake that Bannon and Trump made last week is by trying to placate the unplacatable. That their enemy is the Freedom Caucus, not my enemy, not the enemy of the Democrats, the enemy of Trump. He's figured that out, and now he's going to discipline the remainder of the Republicans and try to find himself 25 deaths.
Problem is, he's done his level best in 70 days to make it politically toxic for any Democrats, even if they like it on infrastructure to work with him, to now do so for their own political health. And secondly, he's made enemies out of Republicans that he didn't need
Richard,
to.
what happens when he puts out a real infrastructure bill, not the baloney they've been talking about, that requires real
I'll tell you
revenue?
right now.
The Democrats will go.
Tell you
with
right
it.
now, you hit on your head. He's got to pick. He's got to get a win. He'll get a Gorsuch win. Whether they go nuclear option or not, I don't think people are really going to care at the end of the day. I think he'll get that. But if he's going to pick a win and he chooses to make it infrastructure before taxes and everything else, he's not going to get 30 Democrats to go along because of everything
With
that
a
came
good
before.
infrastructure bill,
Even with a good
he'll
one.
get 50.
I think you're wrong.
You really think he's going to do
Nope.
a direct investment infrastructure bill that doesn't rely
That's
on,
the caveat.
secondary
If-
funding?
that's a caveat. If he
Gentlemen,
does,
for another night. Trust me, we'll get there. All right, coming up next, though, I know this one will have a debate at the table because maybe my position may surprise you. Ivanka Trump, she's now going to work directly for her father and the American people, theoretically. President's oldest daughter, she's becoming a White House advisor, formal role, security clearance, and everything else. A lot of people are screaming nepotism. Other people are saying, what's the big deal? We'll debate when we come back.